what do you know about newspaper comics?
So when I was little,
Yeah.
in the morning, we would eat cereal and I would read the comics before I would go to school almost every day for several years.
Yeah.
So I know those comics well. And I also remember I owned a bunch of the Garfield books that were like, they were wide and long or whatever you describe that, because they would be like one or two of those strips on each page. They're really short. It's like you gotta set up and knock down your punchline in about 3 panels.
So you got the gist, but for the benefit of our audience, it used to be before there was the web, right? Or before there was Twitter, or before there was Facebook, right? Or even before there was like cable television. Right? The way people got their news was on dead trees.
Yeah.
There's sort of like the post-war suburban version of the newspaper where like white picket fence, single family home, paper boy or girl riding their bicycle, they throw a paper to you every day. There's also the version that's probably closer to what was happening in the 40s when this is taking place, which is, you know, you're going to work every day. Before you get on the bus, before you get on the train, you walk by a newspaper stand and you pick up a paper to read on the bus or train on your way to work, or on the way home, right? You grab one to read on the couch. No television really in homes yet, right? You have, maybe you go to the theater for some movies. You've got radio, right?
Radio,
But
yeah.
like newspapers are major mass media, right? No internet, no phones.
Oh yeah. Well, and like the number one sense for people is sight. So seeing things
Sure.
is really big. Like I had this interesting comparison when I was learning about dog training, where they were like, yeah, when you go on a walk, your dog loves it because they're smelling all these different things, and it's almost like you sitting and watching a movie. You don't have to go anywhere, but it's just like it fills your mind with all
It
the
like
things you're
washes
seeing.
over you. Yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, I that totally makes sense that sitting at home and listening to a radio would be like cool and interesting, but like I would be too fidgety. And whereas like looking and seeing something with my eyes would settle me down in a different way because the sense is more stronger.
And it's subsidized, right? It's subsidized by advertisement.
Of
It's
course,
very
yeah.
cheap, right?
Capitalism.
Yeah. There's not even a distribution cost really, right? Because you're going
Yeah.
and getting it. So, you know, very, very cheap. It's something that's affordable, even for people who potentially can't afford to have a radio. So yeah, the Batman newspaper comic strip starts in October of 1940.
There's one other thing I
Yeah.
did want to say on that. So to the same points you're making, it is a visual medium, but because of the way that newspapers are, it's super short form because
Yeah.
you would have like a page full of these things. So like instead of watching a movie, now you could watch like an Instagram reel.
Sure.
It's like
Yeah.
it's a very short form
Yeah.
of the same concept. It's the same thing as what we're talking about here. Is you could read a novel, or you could read a big like Batman issue, multiple pages, or
Sure.
in the newspaper, you're very short form, like single line, 3 to 4 panels.
Yeah, in the daily strips, it is a single line of cells, 4 to 5 cells usually, actually, for Batman. Although there were different formats, so different comics may have had different things. You know, they're single panel, family circus style things like that.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And that would run Monday through Saturday. Those daily strips are black and white, and they started in October of 1943 for Batman. On Sunday, the comic is in color because the newspaper is in color. That format is much closer to that of a normal comic page, right? So the Batman
it's longer.
Sunday strips are like 12 panels laid out across like 4 rows. So it's like a single page of a comic book. In the case of both, right, the story is continuous, but they don't cross over. So for example, the daily strip every single day is picking up where the last day left off. But in the case of the Sunday strip, you're picking up where the last Sunday strip left off. And the reason for that is because not every paper is going to carry both. So you might be reading, you know,
Interesting.
the New York Times and they do the dailies Monday through Saturday, but Sunday there's no Batman. Or you might be reading like, I don't know, the Daily Mail, you know, some other newspaper, and they don't have the daily strip, but they've got the Sunday strip. They could be carrying both, but they may not.
It's really interesting. So that makes me wonder if this was like a Bob Kane financing thing to say, let's get in multiple newspapers. That way people buy from more newspapers and then Batman gets more kickbacks.
Yeah.
Because if like you could do the New York Times Monday through Friday and then like Saturday and Sunday to get Batman, you have to do the New York Post or something.
I don't know. I get this. That's very possible. I get the sense that Bob Kane, for the record, is like very much in love with the idea of doing a newspaper strip. At the time, comic books are less prestigious, more disposable, less well regarded, right? Because comic books are pretty new, right? They've not been going on that long. Newspapers and comic strips and newspapers go back decades, right? So for him, he grew up reading them. They have a much larger distribution. People are buying newspapers because they want the news and they're getting the comic strip. People who are buying comic books want comic books, right? So like it's for adults, it's for families, it's for kids as well, versus a comic book which is only for kids. So Bob Kane was very, very enamored with the idea of doing comic strip. He's very excited about it. He essentially, in 1943, when he starts working on the newspaper strip, completely stops working on the comic books, right? He totally switches over because he thinks it's a bigger deal. That being said,
cool.
I think from a business perspective, he's not really in control. So at this point, he's contracting with DC, and DC is working with the Syndicate. And so the Syndicate is the company that's selling the strip to various publishers. The sense I got when I was reading about history of this is that they might choose to carry the strip or not, literally based on like whether they have space. Like a lot of times when they're building their comic book page or their comic strip page, they're deciding like, okay, I have something that's like 3 inches wide by 2 inches tall. What can slot, right? And they're literally choosing stuff based on format, based on price, based on audience, right? So why one might have the dailies and not the Sundays, or vice versa, I don't really know. But for the record, this arrangement that they have, where there's 3 actors, right? There's Bob Kane and his shop, there's DC, and there's the Syndicate, is very unusual. Normally, newspaper strips were contracted directly between the newspaper syndicate and a writer artist. So Batman is more corporate, right? There is more middlemen. It is something that's like a brand that is selling it. It's not sort of an auteur. And the person who's sort of driving the boat here is an editor named Jack Schiff, right? So he does the work of sort of shepherding, keeping things on time, etc. Bob Kane and his shop are delivering things that like need inking or need lettering and all that stuff's happening in the bullpen at DC, which is kind of odd. So according to Bob Kane, he primarily penciled the dailies, but did not work on the Sunday strips. Quote, "I couldn't do both. It would have taken me too much time. You can't do Sundays and dailies. It becomes impossible." You know, as always with Bob Kane, we have to take everything he said with a grain of salt. It's very likely that he had ghosts throughout the run and wasn't doing as much drawing as he'd lead you to believe. However, I will say, we're going to read the first 6 days here in a second, and it is a little bit more of a cartoony style. It's a little bit sillier. It's a little bit more of what you would expect from a comedy that comes in a newspaper strip. And my understanding, according to Jerry Robinson and other people who are on the record, that is actually where Bob Kane's skills lie, right? He had previously done inking for like Betty Boop, as an example, at Fleischer Studios. And so this is more in his wheelhouse, more up his alley. You know, there's less ink spilled. Like, not a lot of people have written historical documents. There's not as many books. There's not as many articles. People aren't as interested in the newspaper strips. So people haven't done that sort of in-depth research. But I kind of believe that Bob Kane was doing more penciling here. And the newspaper strip doesn't go on that long. It's done by like 1946, right? So it's only active for like 3 years. So if he is doing the penciling, which I think it's pretty likely he's doing some, this is probably the last time he ever does any penciling. But from then on, he's coasting. He's not really doing any work. Yeah.
Really interesting.
Yeah. Because we know he doesn't come back to the comic books.
Right.
Basically, 1943, he's out for good. They're just putting his name on it.